Jim Rooney is today's guest on the Bleav in Steelers show. He's here to talk about his book commemorating his father, the late, great Steelers chairman, Dan Rooney. But before we get to that conversation, today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. We're well into the football season. If you want to get in on the action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. In-game betting, over-unders, player spreads, player props. Head over to betonline.ag to get into the action today. Head over to betonline.ag. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, to my conversation with Jim Rooney. Welcome into the Bleav in Steelers show. I'm Mark Bergin. I am very pleased and honored to be joined today by Jim Rooney. He is the son of the legendary former Steelers chair, Dan Rooney. Jim, welcome into the Bleav in Steelers show.
Mark, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to get into your book commemorating your father, but I want to talk the here and now. Steelers off to a 9-3 start. New quarterbacks with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith, the team's new OC. What do you make of the Steelers in 2024 so far this season?
Well, I think that they're doing a great job. I think most people, and Mark, you've been around a while. Football doesn't really start until December. I mean, it's good to position yourself well going up to that point, but now it gets real. So let's see where it goes.
Yeah. And that back half of the stretch, the schedule makers didn't do Pittsburgh any favors. Now, I will say this too, though. I don't think it was a coincidence with the team featured on Hard Knocks that they saved all of the division games for later on in the season.
Well, Roger Goodell's in my book, so I'm not gonna go too hard on the league, but it is ironic at the very least. Let's say that.
What's it like for you to see the Steelers featured on Hard Knocks, considering the teams never really fit the criteria of when they do the show in preseason and training camp? The teams that are featured the year before have had losing seasons. That hasn't happened in Pittsburgh in 21 consecutive years.
Well, I've watched a few episodes of Hard Knocks over the years, and then I watched Monday Night. I thought it was a lot of fun. But Mark, the world has evolved, and certainly we've had to evolve with it. So our digital media team really is all over the place. We're covering ourselves in ways that we're beyond what I would ever conceived of. We do a great show called The Standard that follows along different aspects of the team. So it's not as unique as it would have been 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen The Standard too on YouTube, on the team's YouTube channel as well, and just getting that behind the scenes access just gotten more and more popular all throughout sports, and just kind of give a glimpse into, hey, here's what the day-to-day lives is for players and coaches.
Yeah, and it's as I said, it's funny because I never expected us to be. I think we do a lot of things well, but I did not expect us to be good in the digital platform world. And I think all the folks on that team have just done a marvelous job, and have put the Steelers out there in a public way that's better than I could have imagined.
Yeah, and just getting to see behind the scenes with Mike Tomlin. I know it's something in Pittsburgh the Steelers fans are accustomed to seeing, but to see that on a national stage, and then to see him mic'd up of just, coaching George Pickens through a moment after a pick six to say, hey, this isn't going to define the game, or to say to Nick Herbig, a second-year player, saying, hey, this is the expectation of what we expect from you to make a dynamic play in the game with his opportunities. To get to see that, and then to get to see what he's saying to the players after the fact. I know it's something in the Steelers organization you get to see every single day, but just to get that behind the scenes access, it's like, it's easy to see why players would want to run through a brick wall for Mike Tomlin.
It's really interesting. I used this analogy the other day talking about the book I wrote, My Father. Mm-hmm. It really reminds me, Mike has a different personality style in a lot of ways than my father, but it's a very similar thing. My father always worked with people when they were struggling, and whether it was former players, whether it was coaches going through rough seasons, and he had high expectations, and I think that's that's the trick, or the balance of I hope when the Steelers are good, what is done well, and it is that idea of not, bringing those standards down, not making things less, but really being able to be with someone. And when he hugged George in the Hard Knocks on Monday, I really felt, that reminded me of the connection my father had with him, had with Coach Cowher, and had with a lot of our players, because there is that sense of brotherly love, for lack of a better word, while saying we're going to be the best, or we're our goal is to be the best. And balancing those is I think what makes the Steelers different, and what we I think strive for in being different is to be both, really good and really caring, really attentive and attuned to the people in the system, while also saying we're not going to lower our standards to bring that type of compassion.
You use the words standard and standards. What do you attribute the team's stability of since 1969? Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin. I mean, Jim, there have been more popes of the Catholic Church during that time span than Steelers head coaches. What do you attribute that stability to?
Yeah, and again, that goes into things that I think my father did really well, and certainly my grandfather kind of started those. But my grandfather was great at promoting. Was a great sports promoter, great at boxing, but football was a 24/7 operation. Even back then, even if it was only 9 months, it was still, there was a consistency and a locker room, things we talk about in culture. They aren't the same in promotion. So my father somehow really got that. And I don't exactly know where or why, but he really understood these concepts of continuity, of stability, of patience. And I think he really brought them in. And then when he did his hiring practices, you talk about Coach Noll, but he also brought a great PR gentleman named Joe Gordon, and Joe really helped transform, what we call the Steelers brand or Steelers Nation. Working with my uncle Art, working with Bill Nunn, the great scout, and bringing Bill in. He just understood that you needed people who could have that capacity, that ability to do the job. You have to know the X's and O's, but also understood that things are going to go wrong. I think so many businesses, organizations want to, and I'm not saying the Steelers are looking for problems, but they do all they can to get around problems. My father understood that you go through problems. And I think that's one of the differences. And he had enough patience to understand when troubles came, that you stick to your fundamentals, you evaluate the situation, you make decisions that you have to make in those problems, but they aren't counter to what you fundamentally believe. And I think that sets up the continuity that over and over again you're able to achieve success.
Could you share an example of his relatability to be able to communicate with and be successful with people from many different kinds of backgrounds?
Sure. Let me give an example, and then let me give two examples, because I think the one that is really easy to understand that sets up the second, based on the conversation we just had, is Bill Cowher. So from 1997 to 2000, the Steelers had 3 losing seasons in there, and everyone was calling for Bill's job and saying, we lost the Super Bowl in '95 and we've gone downhill since. And my father, he was evaluating Bill. He wasn't, if we would have kept going down, things would have been different. But he was shoulder to shoulder. He wasn't sitting there, criticizing Bill or running or hiding from the hard things. He was shoulder to shoulder with him, looking at the problems, and he saw Bill was addressing the situation. We had some great draft picks in those years. We brought in some great players, and then the next 5 years, if Tom Brady doesn't play up in New England, I would say we're the best team in football those next 5 years. And so he understood that set of problems was going to come. And so he understood that it's not a short-term fix. You stick with the people that you brought in. You have faith in them. You work with them to help them solve their problems. So that's how he approached problem solving. Again, he almost relished hard things. He liked going into those difficult things. So then when you look at something, whether it was labor, the collective bargaining agreement between the players and owners that my father played such a critical role in. Whether it was the situation in Ireland where you had, thousands of years of war between Catholics and Protestants, and he decided, let me use my platform as an American businessman to raise money for the peace process. Or whether it was race and particularly in coaching, looking at the situation and saying, we truly aren't giving opportunities the way we should. This isn't making sense. And then seeing a guy like Tony Dungy, who was part of our organization, not get interviews. Then when he got the few interviews he got, not getting the jobs. And my dad really understood that he was better than so many of the folks that were getting jobs over them. So he really began to stand up. Ultimately, you get this thing called the Rooney Rule, but it was standing up and saying, this isn't right. If we're going to be an organization, in this case, the NFL, that does the right things, we can't run and hide from this problem. And having a willingness to stand at the forefront, try things new. The Rooney Rule was actually really successful at the beginning, and then it didn't do as well for about 10 years. And then there were improvements. And that was who my father was. He stuck with problems, stuck in the middle of difficult situations, even when he saw that the results might take longer to get to than everyone else might want to get that return.
You see that legacy carry over even recently with the Steelers hiring Brian Flores, and Flores coming in, doing a really nice job with the linebackers, shoring up the defense. And then he's gotten his next opportunity as the defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. So you see that legacy where the Steelers organization, Mike Tomlin, all on down, from the leadership on down, to say, hey, while the rest of the league doesn't want this guy who's suing the league, he can help us. And I thought there was a huge difference. So you see that legacy even today. And to me, that's just yet another recent example of that, when no one wanted to touch Brian Flores. Hey, Pittsburgh took him, and not only did he thrive with the opportunity that he had here, again, he's now a defensive coordinator again in doing his thing, and Minnesota's having a really good season as well.
Flo is a great football coach, and I'm so glad to see what he's doing up in Minnesota. Maybe Super Bowl 59 will be a repeat of Super Bowl 9 with the way both teams are playing here.
Okay, I see what you're doing, Jim.
Vikings Steelers Super Bowl there, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Brian Flores is the defensive coach in that. It was Mike's genius. I mean, Mike said, let's do this. This is a great coach. Why in the world would we leave this guy out there? And I'm proud of Art. It would have been easier as the chief executive to just say, there's going to be a whole set of problems dealing with someone that's suing your organization. But Mike's genius said, no, we want this guy to be a coach in our organization. And Art said, yep, let's go for it. And I'm proud of that.
Absolutely. I want to change gears here a little bit here. We're going to go way back in time. You were one of 9 siblings growing up with the Rooney family. What was that like?
It was a lot. And I was the 8th of 9. So Art is the oldest, and I have 2 brothers, John and Dan, in the middle, and then 5 sisters that are amazing people. They don't put themselves in positions where they're as recognized as the rest of us. But growing up with all my sisters and my brothers, it was a lot of fun. We played a lot of football. We being Irish, we had a lot of fist fights, but we had a lot of love for each other. And it's interesting. Now we have probably 5 different text chains, and we have multiple conversations going on during every game, and so it was a good time. And my parents were tough. My mother, my father set very high standards, as he did with the Steelers and everywhere else. But my mother ran the boat at home, and there was no messing around with my mom.
I'm not going to ask you what those text chains say, but what's your role in the text chains? Are you the one who stirs the pot? Are you a peacemaker?
Well, we all went to Ireland the first year Dad was ambassador, and I think that was the first year that Survivor was on TV, and I was the first one voted off the bus. So, that might give you an understanding of where I sit sitting there. But we have a lot of fun.
Oh, that's terrific. That is absolutely terrific. What I want to ask too is, what are some of the things that Dan learned from his father, the Chief, that have been passed down from generation to generation, considering the Rooneys and the Steelers are synonymous?
Yeah, I would say that, number one, I write about my father's qualities in managing the people side with the business organization side. And he just did that really well. And he knew how to make decisions in balancing those two things over and over again, about as well as anyone I've ever seen in any business. But the Chief was the best. Ike, and you know how he talks about my father. My father couldn't hold a candle to my grandfather when it comes to people relationships. My grandfather was the best I'd ever seen. And I've met a few presidents and leaders of different places across the world. And no one had that touch in a position of influence like my grandfather. He was just so good at it. And so my father, I think, understood that and grew into that. I think if you talk to the guys from the 70s, they'll say Dan Rooney was really important. And I have many of them in this audio book. And they say, look, Dan Rooney was really important, but the Chief was the guy who really made us feel good. And my father, I think, took that on and learned how to embrace that. But that wasn't his number one skill set. That was the Chief's number one skill set. And I think Art, is really doing that now. Art's getting a little older. His hair's getting a little gray there. And, I really see him focusing on the relational side in a way that really reminds me of my father and my grandfather when they got up there. Art's a lot older than me. So, I tease that he's at those ages that little bit higher up there than where I am.
Yeah, I always loved reading about how the players would interact with your family, whether it was traveling together in the locker rooms, and just that bond that exists between the two is just, anytime I get to read about that, it's like, sign me up. Do you have any stories with coaches or players of your personal interactions, of when we talk about Steelers players, of what's most memorable to you?
There's so many amazing memories, but I have to go to Coach Noll. I mean, Coach Noll and Mary Ann, helped raise me. My mother said this publicly, that if anything ever happened to her and my dad when they were traveling, that she wanted Coach Noll and Mary Ann to take care of the kids, which, was 9 kids. It's not a small ask. But spending time in the summer with him on vacations. We would go to Florida. We went to North Carolina a couple times. And I remember he and I were out in a canoe once in one of those inlets somewhere in the South. I can't remember, in Carolina or Florida. And there were gators everywhere. And I was getting really nervous. And I started shaking the boat. And Coach Noll said, don't shake the boat. Just be as calm as you can. But we don't want to fall in right now. But, spending time with him there. I remember we took a raft out in the ocean once, and these porpoises were swimming beside us, and he stopped the raft, and they all came up, and we got to, pet these porpoises in the middle of the ocean. And so Coach Noll was like no one else. And he had such a major impact on the Steelers. I always say he taught us how to win. We wanted to win. The Rooneys wanted to win, but he taught us how to win. And my dad's genius, if you will, was learning how to sustain that. But that role was so important. But on the personal side, he was the teacher with us that he was with all the players. When you hear them talking about a great teacher, and it had nothing to do with football. So that's the sort of individual moment that I reflect on as probably the most meaningful in that way. And then getting to hang out with all these guys, Franco's behind me. I guess it's that way. So Franco used to take all the ball boys to Velazzi's, which is a pizza place up in Greensburg, one night during training camp, and
In Latrobe.
in Latrobe. Yep. And so, just those little things were so amazing. Lambert and Blount, I used to always work with the defensive backs, and they both had there'd be one pouch of chewing tobacco, and one guy would want it, and I'd walk down, and the other guy would say it, and they would have me give messages that I can't repeat here on the podcast, but I'm like, I can't say that. And they'd be like, you better say it. So I remember doing this back and forth between Mel and Lambert, and then the D-backs and the linebackers would come together for the last half of the drills. And, they'd be laughing at me at kind of how they were teasing me throughout those, but those were all special moments in my life.
I don't think the current generation understands how dominant Mel Blount was as a cornerback. And here's what I liken it to, right, Jim? When in baseball, they had to lower the mound because Bob Gibson was so dominant. In basketball, and they had to referee Shaquille O'Neal the same way. When Mel Blount was dominating at the line of scrimmage and just physically imposing his will on opposing wide receivers to say, we have to change the rules of the game. That to me tells how dominant you are as a player, that you literally changed the game. I don't know if the current generation quite understands that.
I love Rod Woodson. I loved watching Dion as a football fan. Mel Blount to me is the greatest cornerback to ever put on a uniform. He was that good and that dominant. And they literally, like you said, football wouldn't be the same. I would enjoy the football that Mel Blount played, but I don't know that we would have 1 million fans or 50 million fans every weekend watching a guy like Mel just beat up receivers all day, which is what he did.
You mentioned too the trips to Latrobe. I mean, I've talked to people that cover the team, people that played for the team, people who coached the team. The trips to Latrobe and St. Vincent College and that legacy that was built with Chuck Noll and Mean Joe Green and the foundation that still exists today, and that standard. People can go on vacation to all these exotic places, to Mexico or the Caribbean or everything. In Pittsburgh, and if you're a Yinzer, the family pilgrimage and the family vacation is to go see the Steelers in training camp. And that is just so unique, considering its proximity to Pittsburgh as well. And it's something that I hope exists for forever, because to get that access to the players and coaches and to see that firsthand, it's something special. I don't know if it's something that exists with other teams and organizations throughout the league.
Yeah, and in the late 70s, early 80s, we didn't have near as sophisticated a system. So the fans on those gates, when we'd climb up those steps, going into the locker room, I mean, they would just crash those gates, and the players had to go through this gauntlet of handshakes and autographs, and it was a lot of fun. The guys were sometimes worn out, getting to the top of the steps, but it's much more organized today, which is great. And I think overall fans get to enjoy it in a little more organized way. But I never forget, those days back in the olden days when I remember, I think it was 82 picture day. I mean, there might've been 25,000 people, at Latrobe that day. It was the biggest crowd I've ever seen on that hill. And, it was the end of, well, I guess Joe had just retired, but everyone kind of had that sense that you weren't going to see these guys forever. And I remember walking up that hill after practice, and I mean, you could barely get to the top. It probably took each guy an hour to get from the practice field to the locker room. So the special place. And Father Paul Taylor, who I got to give a shout out to, who runs St. Vincent's, he's really done everything he could to make it continue to make it a special place for the Steelers.
That's phenomenal. I want to go back to your father and my co-host Ike Taylor, for years here on this show, talked about their bond together and how special that was. I want to ask you, Jim, is that Ike served as a pallbearer at Dan Rooney's funeral. How did your family decide, of all of the Steelers greats, that Ike would be the player representatives with the grandsons to be a pallbearer at Dan Rooney's funeral?
Well, Ike had a really special relationship. However, I do have to say this because Ike loves the story about Ike, and Ike's my man. But we had already decided that Joe Green was going to give a eulogy at the luncheon after. So Joe was first on the list.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, okay, we'd like to have one more person besides all the grandsons. And so there were a couple guys in mind, and a lot of them were linemen. And we said, well, I don't know that they're going to be able to do it. There's a lot of steps involved, and a lot of the older linemen, they got bad knees and everything. So we said, well, Ike was clearly someone at the end who Dad just loved and had such care for. He was the right guy.
Yeah, he's aging like fine wine as well. I've worked out with Ike, and it's like, oh man, it's amazing. My carcass still isn't in his driveway. We worked out together one time, and it was like, oh, he's still in great shape too.
I remember my brother Dan, who's a scout, and I were at a skating thing, and Jay Caulfield was there, and he was pushing Mario to come back from his cancer. And so he put us through the workout that Mario was doing. Dan and I both played a little bit of, beer league hockey. Mm-hmm. And I think we made about 5 minutes of that. And, I don't know if I've been on skates since. I understand.
Yeah. Ike has told me, though, this too, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here too, where it's like it really hit him of the impact that your dad had, where he looks around and, it's a who's who of the NFL, but when he was like, President Barack Obama was there and all of these other world leaders, it just showed the impact that your father had on so many different people.
Well, my father always felt that, he had a responsibility that it's funny because we live in this world, and it's part of the world we live in, but where everything's about return on investment and what are you going to get back? And my father believed, that if you did things well, you had to be smart, you had to be capable. And he was a very competent businessman, but you don't worry about profits. You don't worry about returns. You focus on doing things well, and, and the what you need will come to you. And I know some people might think that's Pollyannic, but that's who my dad was. And in doing that, he got involved in things that were, like I said, harder. The situation in Ireland, it was a pretty terrible situation. I mean, he took us into war zones when we were kids, which was absurd. But we were in some pretty rough places in Northern Ireland, when I was a kid. But he just felt like, look, I have this responsibility. I've been given so much. We've been so successful. We have the responsibility to give back and do it in how he saw it, in a very real way. And I think he just earned respect from so many people in so many different fields because he was willing to step into these challenges, willing to be there when it was hard, willing to make difficult decisions. Joe Green in the audiobook talks about, my father in a negotiation won't give him a quarter is the way Joe says it. And then, he decides to hire Bill Cowher over Joe. And in both cases, he says, look, I don't like hearing no from anyone. Joe says this, but he said, I just had so much respect for your father. I understood if he was saying no, he had thought through why this was the best decision. And even if I didn't like it, I respected it. And I think that kind of epitomizes who my father was. And then, a lot of folks just felt that was something special and connected to him, like President Obama and other folks who came to the funeral. That was pretty cool. When I had known 2 days before that President Obama was going to come, and you're grieving, so it's not like another circumstance, but it still was like, wow, that is a special tribute.
Tremendous honor. When did you get the idea that it was the possibility that your dad would serve as an ambassador with Ireland? When did you first learn about that, where it's like, this might actually come to fruition?
Well, so I was the one who got the call. I had spent a lot of time with my father during 2008 and the things he was doing. And so there was a brief conversation before the Super Bowl, but then after the Super Bowl, after we beat the Cardinals in the Super Bowl, I get a call from a gentleman named Reggie Love, who was the president's right-hand man. Reggie played football and basketball at Duke. And so Reggie is sort of the right-hand man of the president. He says, does your dad want to be an ambassador? And I said, look, my dad would be honored to serve the president in any way he would ask, but that's your call. We're not going to ask for something like that. And then Eric Holder, who was the attorney general, was actually a lawyer for the league. And Holder said, if Dan Rooney's interested, we got to make him an ambassador. And he really became my father's champion. And then the word on the street is President Obama, when it kind of got to him, said, oh, if this was something Dan Rooney wants, I want him. So then there was a long conversation on whether he should go to the Vatican or whether he should go to Ireland. And, at the end of the day, it just seemed to make most sense to send him to Ireland, and it worked out perfectly.
You mentioned some of the tough decisions that he had to make. What was the toughest in that regard with his role as ambassador?
Well, he did a couple things that were cool and unique. Ireland, we think of Ireland as a whole lot of people that look like me, and there certainly are a lot of them, but Ireland has evolved. So Dublin now has a 15% Muslim population. It has a 3% Jewish population. These are things you wouldn't think of, most people wouldn't think of as part of Ireland. And so there's a lot of diversity there. And then you have the Catholic and Protestant struggles that have gone on. Most of them are in the northern part, but they still flow into the Republic of Ireland. And so my father created these ecumenical breakfasts. So every other Friday, he would bring in a group of religious folks from all of these different religions and just have a nice breakfast. He didn't have a big agenda. He didn't give a big speech. He just really tried to get the leaders from these different organizations, different religious organizations together so that they could get to know each other. So that was something I was really, really proud that he did. It was a Dan Rooney idea, did it all himself. And so I've seen him make harder decisions, if you will, from a decision-making standpoint, but sort of the insight and the willingness, I don't know that it was purely courageous at that point, but there was a willingness to do something that was different and to step up and to step into a situation that is rare. And I think that was who he was. And those were really, I think, meaningful conversations that folks had.
What's the biggest life lesson that you learned from your dad?
That you got to get in the middle of it. You can't stand on the sidelines. I guess three things. You got to step up. You got to step into things. You got to have patience. Trouble times are going to come, and you can't get knocked over when things don't go your way. And then do the right thing. That he always said that. Everyone I interviewed in the audiobook said, what's the one thing you think of when you think about Dan Rooney? It's do the right thing. And what he meant by that is, don't do it for the money. Don't do it for the glory. Don't do it for some expected return. Is the decision you're going to make, the action you're going to take, going to help the people that you're involved with? Whether in his case, the Steelers organization or your family, whoever might be impacted by your decision, do the right thing when you make a decision. So those are the three things I probably learned from him.
Well said. Well said. All right. I saved the tough stuff for last. And I know this is like picking a favorite child. Do you have a favorite Steelers team? I imagine it's one of the 6 Super Bowls, but if you have a favorite, if you have to list a few too, I understand.
I mean, they're all really special. My father always talked about winning that first Super Bowl. I will never forget. I was a pretty young kid, but the feeling that everyone around me had when my grandfather was on that podium, and the tears in their eyes, and the way everyone felt. So since it's an anniversary of the 74 team, let's say the 1974 Steelers, which as you know, Mark, was a a unique year for the team with Joe Gilliam starting the season, a strike at the beginning of the season where Rocky was the head of the Players Association or players rep for the team, and he and my dad working together in a new way. The great rookie class that we had brought in. So 74 was a special year in Steelers history.
That 74 class, I don't think we're ever going to see anything else like that ever again. Like drafting 4 and then you get the 5th and the undrafted. So 5 Hall of Fame players in one class on one team. I don't think we're going to get a rookie class league wide that does that ever again. That 74 class is just, it's all time. It's all time.
I rarely try to push back too hard to journalists when I'm on one of these things, but I was with someone who was pretty much a expert in football, and he said maybe the best draft class of all time. I said no, that was the best draft class of all time. Like you can't, it's not arguable. That's not a debatable question. There's some statistics that are just too strong.
Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth, Mike Webster, and then you get Donnie Shell as an undrafted free agent. That's never happening for one team again. And show me when that happens when you get 5 Hall of Fame players in one class. I'll wait, but it's like I don't think it's ever going to happen.
We got Randy Grossman, and I'm trying to think. There was one other starter, So they picked two other players that were really good football players,
Well, this is what Ike was telling me all the time too, is in the Hall of Fame, there are players that are still deserving to go. I mean, recently you've got Hines Ward, James Harrison are waiting to get in. In league-wide, it's like, wait a second, there's too many Steelers in it. It's like, well, hang on. If they have better accomplishments than players on other teams, I get that those players might mean more to those franchises, but it's like, what are we talking about here? So, and I'll tell you another guy who deserves to be in who is not. The fact that L.C. Greenwood is not in the Hall of Fame, I've never understood it. A guy has 4 sacks in a Super Bowl, and it's just forgotten about in history. I know Steelers fans haven't forgotten that, but that to me just does not make any sense.
And it's really unfair to those guys, because each of the 3 men you mentioned, I think, belong in. And then,
absolutely,
I think you look at a Pouncey. I think there's a great case, and then is that going to start impacting other guys that we see guys since then that I think have every case. It is the reason that my brother Art really pushed for this Hall of Honor, which the Steelers are celebrating this weekend. But because he understood that there are some politics involved in getting into Canton, and he wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we have that belief that these guys are that special, and really has tried to make the Hall of Honor a really special honor to be in the Steelers Hall of Honor. So I think that that's something that I think is a great thing that we've done more recently, and recognizing those guys, is special. I remember I did this on one of those, I don't know what it was, some type of social media conversation I was in, but I said, you take the 22 best Steelers against the 22 best people in NFL history, and I'll take that. I'll take our team. I'll take our chances in that game. That's how special I think the Steelers, players. I mean, look, we have 2 safeties and 2 cornerbacks, so we absolutely have a defensive backfield.
Yep.
We have 2 linebackers. I think there should be 3. We have the best defensive lineman ever. I will take our guys against everyone else in the league any day of the week.
I've talked to Ike about this, I don't know how many times, but what it means to be a Steeler and just how you carry yourself on and off the field, and rallying to the ball and holding not just yourself, but your teammates to that. Again, going back to that standard, I'm totally with you. I do want to ask you this as well.
Sure.
And I think there's really 3 options here. What do you think is the best Steelers team that didn't win a Super Bowl?
Well, I remember this team, although I was young, but everyone talks about it. The 76 team.
I think that's the right answer.
Yeah. Everyone, I mean, when you look at that, Brad was starting to really pick up the passing game and the defense, not that they weren't fantastic in 78 and 79, but, guys were starting to age by 78 and 79. You had really the culmination of the best two. And frankly, to me, that if you ask me who the second best team in NFL history is, I'm going to tell you it's the Oakland Raiders of the 1970s. And that's the team we lost to, and because the Cowboys had more Super Bowls, they get credit and the great Cowboys teams. But, the Raiders had to go through us, and that was pretty difficult. And they were it was so hard to play against them. They were so tough, and they beat that 76 team when we had, a bunch of injuries, but, they're, to me, still the second best team. And the way we played was, if folks, I hope you watch the Browns Steeler game this weekend and enjoy it. But if you want to see a couple great games, go on YouTube or wherever you can get it and watch 3 or 4 Steelers Raiders games between 1972 and 1979, and you will see the best football games you've ever seen.
Less than 10 points per game allowed. And you're talking about the last 9 games of the season, the defense shutting out 5 opponents, 28 points in the other 4 games combined. It's just it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I think that was the right answer. I know the 04 Steelers, Big Ben's rookie year, the 2010 Steelers too. You talk about changing the rules of the league and targeting. A lot of those defenses put opposing offensive players to sleep. Like, they had to change the rules of the game with targeting, with how physical. You go back and look at the footage from these games, even 10 or 15 years ago, more recently. It's like a different sport than what they play now.
Yeah. 2001 also was a great year. When we lost to, Brady went out in the second half, and Bledsoe won that game. But we had a heck of a game. They had a punt. They blocked a kick, and they had a punt return. Other than that, I mean, we played a hell of a game against the Patriots team that went on to win the Super Bowl.
All right. We are like 40 minutes in. I can't believe I haven't asked this, and we can wrap here. You must have been really young. The Immaculate Reception, which a lot of people forget, was before the Steelers won the Super Bowl. What do you remember when you were a kid about the Immaculate Reception, which was also the first Steelers touchdown in the postseason, if I'm not mistaken?
So, we played a postseason game, I think in 56, but it was they used to have, it was basically a bowl game, like a college bowl game. So, which now is different. Now they're playing for championships. Mm-hmm. But they would take the number 3 and 4 team, and they would have a postseason game, but it wasn't a playoff game. So it was really the first playoff game in Steelers history. And in the book, I do an interview with Franco, and it was so cool to get Franco before he passed.
Yeah.
And you hear this conversation we have, and it really becomes, to me, a touching moment, because I share with him that moment didn't just change the Steelers and I think the Steelers' relationship with this community. It changed my family. I mean, my grandfather was known as a successful sports guy in a world that, was sort of an ancient world. What had happened in the 20s and 30s was fun, but those were sort of old time days. This was, football was becoming the new national pastime, if you will. And he, changed the trajectory of my family, but the smiles on everyone's face. So I was 6 years old, and I was not at the game. And I would say it's really the first memory, because I never forget my brother Dan and my mother, when they walked in the door, there was this euphoria. There was this laughing and crying and smiling that, I said this the other day. I have 3 children. I remember holding each of them the moment they were born. And then I remember the Immaculate Reception. That was what that feeling was like. And then I remember when Dad came home about an hour later, and he felt the same. And my father, we talk about, and Ike talks about him being calm and, and treating people well, but he was intense on game day.
Mhm.
And that was the only time ever, any game day, including Super Bowl wins, that I saw him just in total joy at the end of a game. And it was a special moment. So to get to share that with Franco and have him ask me questions like you just did, it was really a joy. And I think it's something that Steeler fans will enjoy, hearing if they're interested, because it's definitely, you get an experience hearing Franco relate to how this all went on.
Jim, I really appreciate you sharing that. And, you see the old clips of the 70s Steelers and Franco's Italian army, but to hear that firsthand of the impact that had on the Steelers organization, your family, just terrific stuff there.
Yeah, it was special. It was special.
Check out Jim Rooney's book, A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. Jim, if there's anything else you need to add that I haven't asked you about or you need to plug, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And, so we just released the audiobook, and I talked about the interview with Franco. Joe Green is on there. Mel Blount is on there. Rocky Bleier's on there. Bill Cowher's on there. Mike Tomlin's on there. If you're driving anywhere over the holidays, if you're going to be in the car or on a plane, it's a great opportunity. Look, you get to hear me read the book, but more importantly, you really get a firsthand experience. And I think it really becomes sort of this intimate connection you get. Mark, you spent a lot of time with Ike, and you know how he relates to my dad. I think folks really get a feeling of why that happened when they listen to these folks talk about that. So if you get a chance, anywhere you download audiobooks. And Mark, I love what you do. I enjoy your work, and keep it going. We got a tough month of December here. Let's everyone, we need all the help we can get going into this.
Yeah, we're recording this right before NFL Week 14, Steelers and Browns. I think this show is going to be coming out after that game. But Jim, I really appreciate your time and insight today. Again, go check out his book as well. This has been another edition of the Bleav in Steelers show. I want to thank today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline. If you enjoyed this conversation on Apple and Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button on the Mark Bergin YouTube page. Thank you again to today's guest, Jim Rooney. I'm Mark Bergin. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care and so long, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.